In the heart of Enugu State, Nigeria, there was a girl of 8 who had lost her parents to a ghastly motor accident 2 years before. Olanma felt lost after the death of her parents. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she understood she wouldn't be seeing her parents again. That alone made her cry for weeks. Olanma's parents from Imo State were average people when they were alive, so they didn't leave much behind in terms of money or property. Olanma's paternal aunt, Deborah, and her husband, Amadi, had to take her back with them to Enugu, where they lived. She had lived with her aunt's family for 2 years now, but the last 2 years had been confusing and sad for Olanma. Deborah and Amadi had 2 kids, Easy and Helen, both of whom were 2 and 4 years older than Olanma. The moment Olanma joined their family, her aunt shifted most of the house chores to her. Olanma was the one to wash the plates at night. She was the one to sweep the kitchen after Deborah finished cooking. Olanma was given the exclusive task of pounding tomatoes, onions, crayfish, and other ingredients when there was no electricity to blend them with a blender. The little child was willing to work. But what usually shocked her was her aunt's attitude each time she was doing a chore. "Why are you so clumsy? Is this how your mother taught you how to pound tomatoes?" she would yell at her. Olanma would stare at her, not understanding why her aunt was so angry. "Just look at how you splash tomatoes everywhere. Be careful," she would shout at her sternly. "Yes, Ma," Olanma would respond quietly. Olanma worked from one task to the other while her aunt's kids watched TV and played around once they were back from school. Amadi was mostly not at home to know how things were really going in his family. He left the house early around 6:45 a.m. for his banking job and came home around 8 o'clock at night. And when he was home, Olanma was most times in the kitchen, helping his wife. He didn't find it necessary to look at Olanma and know if she was fine. Not just overworking Olanma, Deborah gave her half chop, meaning she fed her a small quantity of food each time, and most times Olanma was given leftover food as her main meal. She didn't mind. She ate everything and thanked her aunt and uncle if he was around. Olanma's clothes were getting old and torn in some places. She didn't know what to do other than to continue wearing them. But within her mind, she wished her aunt would give her some of her daughter's old clothes. Maybe one day she would tell her. One evening, Olanma went to fetch water from the tap along the street, close to her house. One of the children in the street pushed her bucket, and the water poured to the ground. The naughty boys laughed at her. Olanma didn't know what to do. They were all boys and would fight her if she protested. Quietly, she went home, not saying anything. She knew her aunt would be angry because even the bucket was damaged. When she got home, Deborah saw her come into the house with an empty, damaged bucket. "What happened?" she asked her. With tears in her eyes, Olanma explained to her what happened. She was still talking when her aunt interrupted her. "You were just careless, walking around the road with your mind elsewhere," Deborah scolded her. "No, Ma," the little girl said, wiping her tears. "I have told you several times to be an attentive girl. You're only using the boys in the street as an excuse. If you continue like this and a car knocks you down one of these days, that's your business," Deborah added. "Go into the house and sweep the kitchen. I'm done cooking." Olanma went into the kitchen, and the aroma of delicious food filled her nostrils. She took in a deep breath, closing her eyes. Then she let out a deep breath. "Oh, Auntie knows how to cook. If only she can give me enough food," she sighed. "What are you doing?" a voice asked sharply. Olanma turned round to see Helen looking at her with a frown. "Ah, I wanted to sweep the kitchen," Olanma said suddenly. "Then sweep quickly because Mom wants to come in and dish us dinner," Helen told her with a pout. She turned and left the kitchen. Olanma picked the broom from the store and returned to the kitchen. Quickly, she swept the kitchen clean. By now, it was almost 7 o'clock in the night, Helen and Easy watched as their mother dished their meal, a plate of huge jollof rice with a big chunk of meat for them. Once their mother was done, Helen carried the plate to the dining, and Easy followed her happily. Olanma watched them, hunger churning in her stomach. "Oh, I hope Aunt will put some food for me too," she prayed silently. She sat quietly on a low stool in the kitchen, watching everything. Deborah dished her own food on a plate and left the kitchen without looking at Olanma. The little girl watched her leave with a fallen heart. She scratched her head in confusion as her stomach rumbled noisily. "Why doesn't Aunt give me food at the same time as everyone else? She does this always," she thought, with a sigh. The little girl leaned her back on the wall and let out a deep breath. "Olanma!" She heard Easy yell her name after 1 hour. Olanma scrambled to her feet and ran to the dining. "Carry off these plates," Easy told her loudly, getting off his seat. Olanma looked at the plates. They were all empty. Her heart somersaulted. "There are no leftovers," she thought with disappointment. "Will Auntie give me food tonight?" "Wash those plates at once," her aunt instructed. "Yes, Ma," she replied in a faint voice. She was already weak, but the hope of eating pushed her forward. She gathered the dirty plates and walked to the kitchen. Quickly she washed the plates, but as she was rinsing one of the plates, it fell to the ground and broke to pieces. "Ewu!" Olanma cried in shock, her heart flying off her chest. She looked around her eyes darting here and there in fear. Did her aunt hear the sound? She burst into tears. "What happened here?" Her aunt burst into the kitchen. When she saw the broken plates, she screamed. "What have you done, Olanma?" "Aunt, Aunt, I'm sorry," the little girl begged. "This is how you want to end today? Good, very good," Deborah said, giving her a heavy knock on the head. "This will be your food for tonight. Pack those broken glasses immediately and disappear from my sight." Olanma packed the broken glasses into the trash, sobbing. She was so heartbroken that her body trembled. Hunger with shock added to her trauma. She ran to the store where she slept and lay on the old mattress that was her bed. Poor Olanma. She cried herself to sleep. One Saturday evening, Olanma was sent to grind beans for Moi Moi along their street. As she was coming home from the errand, some naughty boys on the street began to make fun of her torn clothes. "Oh, her clothes are torn," they laughed. "Will you shut up?" she told them loudly. "If you talk too much, I will push you and your ground beans will pour to the ground," one of them threatened her. Olanma clamped her mouth shut because if the beans poured to the ground, that's 3 days without food for her, she thought. So even as they taunted her, she walked home faster so that she would get home quickly. Finally, she reached home and breathed a sigh of relief. She helped her aunt prepare the moi moi. Helen and Easy could be heard laughing in the living room as they watched a comedy show on TV. When the moi moi was steaming on the fire, Olanma remembered the way those boys bullied her because of her worn-out clothes. "Auntie," she called her aunt softly, looking up at her. "What is it?" Deborah asked, glancing at her. "Please, can you give me some of Helen's clothes? All my clothes now have holes," she told her, her large eyes staring up at Deborah innocently. "What?" her aunt said with a deep frown. "Who gave you the boldness to request that? Oh, you want to look good, right? I can see you have big eyes," Deborah said, wagging a finger at her. At this point, Olanma frowned at her intently. Then quickly she cleared her face. "They make fun of my clothes, Auntie," she told her with pleading eyes. "Ignore them," Deborah told her. "Even at night I feel cold, Auntie. I need another wrapper to cover myself at night. The one I have is also torn in many places." "Keep quiet. I don't want to hear any fim from you again," Deborah warned her. Olanma stared at her aunt and let out a deep breath. What could she do? That night, as Olanma went to bed, covering herself with her old wrapper, she made a vital decision. "I must work hard to be successful in this life. Though I may go to school late, I'll do my best to learn as much as I can, she told herself softly. True, Olanma attended school, but her school was one of the government-owned primary schools in the city where children played more than studied. She was in primary 3, and due to morning errands, she was always late to school. Despite her teacher's complaints, Deborah did not allow Olanma to go to school on time. But Olanma's teacher, Mrs. Uka, understood the little girl's condition. If the situation was not well handled, Deborah might even stop the girl from going to school. Mrs. Uka decided to coach Olanma personally. "I can see you have a strong interest in your studies, Olanma," Mrs. Uka told her one afternoon. "Yes, Ma," Olanma replied with a smile. "During school break, you must come to my table for a 30-minute lesson, do you hear?" "Yes, Ma." Olanma was visibly happy as she flashed her full teeth at her teacher. From that day, Olanma's teacher began to give her extra lessons to improve her knowledge. Olanma was very happy. After doing all the chores assigned to her at home, she would read some of the books her teacher had given her. But most times she fell asleep due to being so tired. Please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button and put the notification on. Thanks. Let's ride on. Time flew and Olanma grew. At the age of 18, she was a pretty girl. She had gone through a lot of maltreatment at the hands of her aunt and her kids. But she had no option than to endure it all. But one thing was startling her. In fact, she had sleepless nights because of it. The way Uncle Amadi looked at her in recent times sent shivers down her spine. She didn't like it all. He would smile at her without reason when his wife wasn't around and would often wink at her. "Good Lord, save me from this man," she would pray in her heart. One Sunday evening, she came to take away the plates after he had eaten, and Uncle Amadi grabbed her apple. Shocked, she staggered back, and the plates crashed to the ground, breaking to pieces. Oh, what happened?" Uncle Amadi asked innocently. Olanma was unable to talk. It was like a sledgehammer, blocked throat. She bent low to pick the pieces of the broken plates. "No, you'll hurt yourself, Olanma." Uncle Amadi got up and held her back. Olanma snatched her hand away and glared at him. "If you try that again, I'll report you to Auntie." Her voice was icy cold. Amadi chuckled and broke into a small laugh. "You should be happy," he whispered to her. Olanma glared at him and moved back. She realized at this moment that she had gotten another battle on her hands. "What's happening here?" Deborah walked into the dining room at this point. I, Olanma stammered. "I mistakenly pushed the tray forward and it went off the table," Amadi told his wife, waving off her concern. Deborah frowned, looking from her husband to Olanma. Had she imagined what she saw? Was her husband becoming familiar with Olanma? Was he smiling at the girl in that conniving manner? She waved the thoughts away. "Clear those things quickly and take care of the kitchen," she told Olanma sternly, and moved to sit down. As Olanma cleared the broken plates, her heart beat fast. What am I going to do now? I was right in my suspicions. Good heavens, help me. Deborah watched her husband as Olanma cleared the broken plates to see his attitude. Amadi kept his face straight, his eyes on the TV. He was aware that his wife was watching him. As Olanma returned to the kitchen, washing the plates, she thought of how to protect herself in the house. She had to be alert from now on. If only I could live on my own and find work. But how? She muttered with a troubled heart. What did your uncle say to you? Olanma turned round at this question. Her aunt was watching her steadily with mean eyes. He asked me if Helen was back, Olanma said, the first thing that came to her mind. I see, Deborah breathed, looking a bit relieved. Speaking of Helen, why's she still out by this time? She turned and left the kitchen. Olanma let out a deep breath. From that day on, Olanma was very careful how she moved around Amadi, especially at the weekends. He used to go out at weekends and come home late. These days, he stayed home, winking at her at every slightest opportunity. One other thing troubled Olanma. She wanted to register for the Senior School Certification Examination, WAC and NICO. Even if she was able to register for only WEC, she would be glad. If you're not able to take the exam next year, you can take it the next other year, her aunt told her when she reminded her of the exam registration. There's no money now. By next year, the registration will be more expensive, Olanma told her in a pleading tone. Don't disturb my peace. Must you take WAX now? How old are you? You're still young, Deborah snapped at her. Olanma turned and left the living room. She knew her aunt was intentionally denying her this examination fee, and there's no way she can boycott her and head over to her husband. And considering Uncle Amadi's attitude, it wasn't a wise idea to approach him for the examination fee. They were already paying for Helen's and Easy's university studies. Olanma didn't expect them to fund her university education, but at least they should pay for her examination fee. While the deadline for the registration approached, Olanma felt desperate. All her classmates had already paid. Her friend Jessica was worried for her. "What are you going to do now, Olanma?" Jessica asked as they sat in front of their classroom during break. "I don't know," Olanma's voice sounded from afar. "Hey, Ola, I know this is too much for you. Look, GCE is usually cheaper. Maybe you can start saving money towards it. And I'll tell my parents. They will support you with a part of the money." Jessica was optimistic. "Are you serious?" Olanma's eyes were large with surprise. "Yes, you can do it," her friend encouraged. "So, even if I miss out on WAEC, I can go for GCE. How many months do we have before the registration comes up?" "I think the first series will soon start in January, but let's target the second series, which will start in July next year. So you have about 6 to 7 months to get the money," Jessica explained. "Oh, you're a darling." Olanma hugged her friend warmly. Her friend hugged her back, patting her back gently. "Anything for you, my friend," Jessica told her. "Though it might be difficult for Aunt Deborah to allow me to work, I'll find a way," Olanma said as they parted. "Sure," Jessica nodded. "Please click the link in the comments for part 2. Also, subscribe to my channel and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.